I started writing these books about lost cities and ancient mysteries, books on anti-gravity, books on Nikola Tesla. We'll talk about him in a little bit. So I'm the author of over 30 books. And I was on TV in the United States on various TV shows the 90s. And then because of the movie Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, that's what created Ancient Aliens, really. Ancient Aliens really was a spin-off from that. When Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull came out, History Channel wanted a documentary about crystal skulls, and I was in that documentary. And that was a popular documentary, so History Channel said, yeah, we want more. And the Prometheus Entertainment, who does Ancient Aliens in Los Angeles, they said, hey, well, let's do a special on Ancient Aliens called Ancient Aliens with Eric Von Däniken and all this stuff. And that was a 2-hour special in the United States, and that's what really launched the TV show Ancient Aliens. So now that I've been on the show, it's been going now for more than 10 years, in fact. And so people will often recognize me. I'll be at an airport or something, and they'll come up to me and they'll say, you're that guy on Ancient Aliens, right? And I say, yeah. And like, can I ask you a question? Yeah, go ahead. And they almost always say, what's with that guy's hair? Giorgio's a great guy, by the way. And I've known Giorgio from before Ancient Aliens, in fact, and Eric Von Däniken too. And I'm fortunate I've met so many of these people over the years, Graham Hancock, Robert Bivol, John Michel was a good friend of mine. So we'll get going, and let's see. With me, I'm really an archaeological writer. I write about archaeological mysteries, and I write on all kinds of things: anti-gravity, UFOs, Bigfoot, various mysteries, whatnot. So for me, megaliths are what's important. And I've been fascinated traveling around the world. I love seeing giant walls and the mysteries associated with them. The largest megaliths that we know about right now are the megaliths at Baalbek in Lebanon, which is right near the Syrian border. And in fact, here's a friend of mine, also a British pilot named Ralph Ellis, and he's there at one of the giant stones at Baalbek. These stones weigh about 1,000 tons. I mean, they're just so huge. And in fact, it's only been recently in the last 5 years or 8 years that the very largest stone that's ever been found in a quarry was found at Baalbek, and it had a bunch of rubble on top of it, so they cleared it out eventually. And it's a stone that's 1,650 tons. I mean, these stones are so super heavy that moving them, even modern construction companies would have difficulty moving stones like this. Normally you would have to build a crane or something at the site to move these things. So why are people building with such giant blocks of stone, which would seem so difficult to us? And I maintain ultimately that it was easy for them to build with these giant stones because they had advanced technology, including levitation and things like that. Now, what you have at Baalbek is this ancient platform of giant blocks of stone, and the largest blocks never actually made it there. And then a Roman temple is on top of it. We have the same thing in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, at the Solomon's Temple, which part of that's called the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, and it wasn't until about 20 years ago that the Israelis themselves cut a tunnel going to the left of the Wailing Walls, and they cut a tunnel going into an unexcavated part of King Solomon's Temple. And what they found was this giant block here. And the woman is standing here in front of it. The block is really above her. We don't know how much this block weighs, but it's also like 1,000-ton block of stone. And then these smaller blocks that she's standing next to, there's about 4. They're perfectly fitted together. There's some articulation. But this is a gigantic megalith. We don't even know how much it weighs because we don't know how deep back the stone goes. But so King Solomon's temple at Jerusalem is similar to Baalbek. It's built on top of another ancient structure that's gigantically huge, and we don't know what these things were. I'm multi-fascinated with obelisks, underwater ruins. I think that some of the largest ruins in the world are probably underwater. In the Mediterranean, I'm a scuba diver too, and so I do scuba dive when I can to ruins. And this is interesting. This was just discovered about 6 years ago off of Sicily. And it is an obelisk that fell over there near Sicily. I'll go back to it. There's over 200 known sunken cities in the Mediterranean. And they weren't built underwater. So there's evidence that at one time the whole Mediterranean was flooded in a cataclysm, and it filled in the Mediterranean. And today we have, as we say, over 200 sunken cities, including this fallen obelisk just off of Sicily. This is, speaking of obelisks, this is the unfinished obelisk at Aswan in southern Egypt. It's an aerial photo. This is also one of the largest megaliths in the world. A typical obelisk weighs about 500 tons. The unfinished obelisk is important, and it actually weighs about 1,000 tons. But what happened with the unfinished obelisk was that whoever was quarrying it, perhaps it was the Egyptians, although it could have been some earlier civilization, they were quarrying through this red granite at Aswan, which is in southern Egypt. And as they began to cut underneath the obelisk, they realized that there was a natural crack in the rock that they hadn't seen yet. And once they saw that crack in the rock, all work on the obelisk stopped because the obelisk wasn't going to be perfect. It was going to have a crack in it. And they couldn't use it. Any obelisk that wasn't perfect, and obelisks, by the way, are, when they're made out of granite, which most of them are, they're infused with quartz crystal. So in many ways, an obelisk is a crystal tower, a quartz crystal tower in many ways. So, and quartz crystals emanate energy. They can even lasers can encode quartz crystals with information, computer information, just like a memory stick or a CD or a DVD or something like that. So we'll talk more about obelisks as we go along. My new book, which just came out recently, is all about obelisks, including obelisks on the moon. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I've always been interested in ancient civilizations and Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, ancient India, all that stuff. And of course, I love to travel to all these places. The story of Atlantis is the story of a pre-flood civilization. Some civilization that's before, say, 10,000 BC or something like that. And Atlantis, the story of Atlantis is an Egyptian story that's told through the Greek philosopher Plato and his uncle Solon, who was a Greek statesman, and he went to Egypt. This is about 500 BC or something. And the Egyptian priests in Egypt said to him, to Solon, they said, "You Greeks don't even know your own history. Greece is a much older country than you even realize." And then they tell him the story of Atlantis. And Atlantis is out beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Straits of Gibraltar. Atlantis, in theory, according to Plato, was out in the Atlantic, say perhaps where the Azores are today, and that it had it had concentric canals that went into a center of a city, and there were huge temples there. There was a large mountain to the north. Atlantis had huge fleets of ships, and the Egyptians tell Solon too that the Atlantis and Greece, or what we would call ancient Greece, and the Mediterranean, that they've even fought a war. There's other lost lands too, including this one, Kumari Kandam. This is the Tamils in southern India. They have this tradition that there's this literally a lost continent that goes south of India down to Australia and Madagascar. And somehow there's this lost civilization that's underwater in the Indian Ocean. So for me, it's traveling around the world, seeing these megaliths, megalithic structures, perfectly fitted together. Blocks of stone, the blocks are weighing 80 to 200 tons. Even a megalith that's weighing only 5 tons is a very large, heavy stone. So once you start building with 20-ton blocks, 80-ton blocks, and as we're looking at Baalbek, 1,000-ton blocks of stone. It would seem so difficult to us. These ruins here are in Peru. They're at a place called Ollantaytambo. And you see here how the massive red granite blocks are fitted together perfectly. What you're seeing in the background is the remains of an unusual wall at what they call a sun temple. And this is what you see today when you go to Ollantaytambo. Huge blocks of granite just scattered around like some kids' play blocks that have just been destroyed by an earthquake, or modern archaeologists think that it was just never completed, this structure. And they're saying that the Incas built this only like 100 years or 200 years before the Spanish got there. But this is what it looks like today. This is what it looked like during the Spanish conquest. This is what it looked like during Inca times too. The Incas were themselves, and the Spanish, they were unable to move any of these blocks. Even the modern Peruvian government today, they can't move these either. And they're on top of a cliff, these things. What you also see at Ollantaytambo are these things, what are called keystone cuts. They're these T-shaped cuts that are cut into granite, as you see. And sometimes they're hourglass shaped too. But there has to be another one on another block that's fitted together. And it's going to have a corresponding T-shaped keystone cut like this. And then molten metals are poured into the keystone cut. So there's a metal clamp there that's joining two blocks. This is an unusual way of fitting blocks. Well, we're going to see it, and it's around the world. And we'll see more of these. So in fact, you can see that at Ollantaytambo, this is going around the corner of one of the blocks. You'll see up here, towards the top on the right, another keystone cut. But it's on a vertical wall. That's not where a keystone cut can be. A keystone cut has to be on a horizontal wall because molten metals are poured into it. So this keystone cut and this whole block that it's part of, it's not meant to be there. It was meant to be part of something else. And it would have, of course, another corresponding cut there. And here we can see Inca construction, just these blocks, these rocks put in here, but it's put next to these gigantic granite blocks that were apparently part of some other structure. As you walk up into what they call the Sun Temple at Ollantaytambo, you go up these stairs, you see again these perfectly fitted but jigsaw granite blocks with these strange knobs. Archaeologists do not know what they're for, although they assume they have something to do with moving the blocks or quarrying, where it's still a mystery of these knobs. You can see these large orange patches of lichen. You come up here. I mean, this is really amazing structure. This is Machu Picchu, which is not very far from Ollantaytambo. Machu Picchu is, today, it's the most popular tourist spot in all of South America. It's a megalithic city. It's a secret city on top of a mountain. The Spanish never knew about it. And it's a spectacular site, too. I hope you all get a chance to go to Peru and see some of the things there. So those buildings that we were just seeing, they're near Cuzco, which is to the north of Lake Titicaca. This is a satellite photo of Lake Titicaca. Lake Titicaca is on the Altiplano of South America. It's at an altitude of about 12,500 feet. It's said to be the largest navigable lake in the world. Parts of Lake Titicaca are very deep. Mainly the very north side up here is extremely deep, about 800 feet or something like that. The southern part down here is shallower. It is said that there are sunken cities and ruins in this lower part, and also around the island of the sun, which is this island in the middle right here. A lot of UFO activity is seen around Lake Titicaca. And supposedly late at night, people witness UFOs coming up out of the water, out of the lake. And in fact, South America itself is quite a hotbed of UFO activity. And in South America in general, the subject of UFOs is a common one. Most people totally believe in UFOs in South America. And local news stations and things like that, they're constantly reporting on UFOs and have footage of UFOs. It's especially in South America, talk of UFOs is very, very common. One of the strange things of Lake Titicaca is that there are seahorses in Lake Titicaca, which geologists cannot explain. Seahorses live really in tropical coral reefs, like in Indonesia and Hawaii and stuff like that. They're not in alpine lakes at 12,500 feet. So how did seahorses get to Lake Titicaca? In a sense, what geologists would say is that, well, Lake Titicaca was at sea level at one time and had seahorses in it, and it would have been part of the ocean. But today, it's at 12,500 feet. As I said, there are some sunken ruins in Lake Titicaca. It's very difficult to dive there because you're at such a high altitude, you need to use mixed gases and things. Some Italian and Argentinian expeditions have gone diving in Lake Titicaca, finding underwater ruins. And in fact, a couple of years ago, this Italian expedition off of the island of the sun made the astonishing claim that they had seen a solid gold obelisk in the water off of the island of the sun, which is pretty incredible. So, this is the Maquiacta Chulpa in Espanar province, which is near to Lake Titicaca, going south of Cuzco. And around Lake Titicaca particularly are all of these strange towers. They're megalithic too, they're called chulpas. This one has an unusual dome on it. It's megalithic, it's also perfectly fitted together. And also near Lake Titicaca are several sites of Silustani and this one called Cutimbo. Cutimbo is up on top of this mesa up here. And when you hike up there, you see all these strange buildings. Some are towers, some are square buildings. They're megalithic too, perfectly fitted together, partially destroyed in some cases. And one of the things that you see on the buildings there at Cutimbo and at Silustani and other places, also in Cuzco, are serpents carved in what we call bas relief on the rocks. So in other words, to have a serpent on these rocks on the left or there in the middle, you actually have to carve all the other part of the rock away and then leave that serpent. So this is especially difficult to make. Some of the other towers have things like pumas on them also, but the serpent symbol is the common one. And here's another serpent in a bas relief on this tower at Cutimbo. Now, Not too far from Cotimbo is the site of Silustani. More tourists go to Silustani than they go to Cotimbo. And Cotimbo is at this, right along this lake called Lake Amayu. According to people, I've been to the site many times, and I'm told by the locals there, they say, yeah, late at night, we see UFOs come out of this lake. That's what they say. There's another lake near Cusco, where also people say, yeah, UFOs come out at like 4 in the morning. Probably not every night, but yeah, UFOs are coming out of the water. It's like they have bases in these lakes and stuff in South America. So at Silustani, and there's part of the lake in the background, once again, we're seeing these megalithic towers, and we see the serpents carved in bas relief. So the builders were doing this. Now, what's interesting is that, and we're talking about the Anunnaki and ancient Sumeria. If you go to northern Iraq and Kurdistan, the temples there of the Yazidis, which is really one of the oldest religions in the world, their temples have these same serpents on them. And they really are these people are the inheritors, essentially, of the ancient Sumerian religion, of the ancient Sumerian culture. And it's their religion. The ISIS and these, the war in Iraq and whatnot, one of the things that these jihadists were trying to do was destroy all these people. And there's only a few of these temples left in Kurdistan in northern Iraq. So there's some connection there, and we'll see some more. So here we go. Here's a modern photo of one of these temples, again with the serpent on there. And in Cusco, you also see all this. I could show you literally hundreds of photos from Peru of serpents on these walls. So on the southern part of Lake Titicaca is Tiwanaku. And Pumapunku is part of Tiwanaku. This is Bolivia. Half of Lake Titicaca is in Peru. The other half is in Bolivia. This is the famous Gate of the Sun at Tiwanaku. It's been split in an earthquake. This is a monolithic door. In a sense, it's a door carved into one giant solid piece of granite. And that is Viracocha at the top. Said to be Viracocha. He's holding 2 strange staffs on either side, some kind of rods. And there's many stories too and Moses had one of these staffs, these magical staffs that you could strike. They could perhaps levitate rocks. Moses had water coming out of a rock when he struck it. But it seems that Viracocha is holding these staffs. We'll see a picture of him in a minute where he's actually got tears coming down on his cheeks. And they say those are the tears of the sun. And the tears of the sun is liquid gold. It's molten gold, molten metals. That's the tears of the sun. So Tiwanaku itself, this is what I maintain in my books, was a metallurgical complex for washing ores. And the towers are actually kilns and for furnaces for melting the ores. Now, on either side of the Viracocha are these birdmen, and they're running toward him. We'll see that in a second. So here's Viracocha. You can see there the tears coming down his eyes, the tears of the sun, molten metals, molten gold. And in fact, at Tiwanaku in ancient times, and mainstream archaeologists know this and they admit it, at Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, the buildings were wallpapered with gold. I mean, it was literally this golden city of the sun. Some historians have suggested that the story of Jason and the Golden Fleece is a story of a trip to Tiwanaku and the fantastic golden city. And by the way, around Lake Titicaca and all through Peru and Bolivia, even today, there's hundreds of gold mines and copper mines. It's tremendously rich in metals. So if you're there to find metals, gold, silver, copper, mercury, all that stuff, you're going to find it in this area and in the Andes. And so here you see the birdmen too. They have wings. Some of them have bird heads. They have men. They have crowns. They all have wings, and they're running toward him. Birdmen, men who can fly. Here's an Olmec birdman found in Costa Rica, made out of jade. He's an Olmec. He's got the elongated head. He's got wings. He's a birdman too. He can fly. So how do these guys fly? They fly in airships. They're flying in vimanas. They have, just like we have today. They had ships, huge giant ships for the ocean, but they had airships as well. They had power tools. They had the capability of perfectly cutting and fitting blocks of stone. They had to have power tools to do this. They had to have the ability, and we still don't know how they did these things, what they did. So this is Pumapunku. We're now looking at the larger area of Pumapunku, which is very much destroyed. You see some of the H blocks in the back. These are huge sandstone platforms. The H blocks are made out of granite. And through excavations, they don't allow you to go into this part of Pumapunku anymore, but you'll see again those keystone cuts that I was talking about earlier. The T-shaped cuts, you see them here, that they would have had metallic clamps put in them. You can see how they were used. They're perfectly fitted together. Here we see more of these keystone cuts on the sandstone slabs. Huge, and these are massively huge slabs with very large keystone cuts too, where they would pour the molten metals. These slabs are so big you wouldn't think they would be going anywhere, but they have the molten metal clamps that harden, and it's part of the building. At the very least, it's to hold the blocks together. It's been suggested to me that one of the things the molten metal does, the clamps, is that as the molten metals cool, they shrink a little bit, and it helps pull the blocks together. That's what's suggested to me. Other people have said it has something to do with technology and electricity and something like that. And that may well be the case. I can't figure out how that would work, though. Here are what some of the clamps look like. They're an alloy, essentially a bronze. In South America, they would often add a little bit of gold to bronze and other alloys. Gold is indestructible. All gold from ancient times still exists today. You cannot destroy gold. Other metals will oxidize. So after a while, they'll rust, and iron and stuff like that. Gold is too soft, really, to make. Gold is okay for electronics and stuff like that, but it's really too soft for, say, clamps and things like that. But you can add a little bit of gold to alloys, and it helps, it keeps them from oxidizing and stuff. All right, now let's go across the Pacific to Vietnam. And this is the same also in Angkor Wat, in Cambodia. You're going to see this at Borobudur in Java. The same keystone cuts. These ones are in basalt. And this is at a city called My Son in central Vietnam, built by the Cam people or the Compa people. They're gone now. And at that time, before the... What was that? What happened there was the Vietnamese kept moving down from the north, and the Thai people were doing the same, moving down from the north into Thailand. And this is all just within historical times. In fact, the Vietnamese only took over Vietnam in the mid-1800s. But before that, central Vietnam, down to the south, to the Mekong Delta, was the Cam people. And they were darker skinned. They were Hindus and Buddhists. They were Shivites. They went out into the Pacific. And one of their cities was called My Son. It's near Da Nang today. And they were very similar. Their statues and things looked very Egyptian, but also very Tibetan. They would have statues of Shiva. But they also used these same keystone cuts. And these ones are in basalt, which is even harder than granite. All right, so let's go back to South America, back to Lake Titicaca. Here are those H blocks. They have keystone cuts too in some of them. And this is actually a painting that's at the museum at Tiwanaku. So here you see, and this is, to me, this is very typical of museums, where you have a real paradox, a dichotomy of this highly, sophisticated and articulated blocks of granite that are perfectly cut and megalithic. They're going to be fitted together perfectly. But then you have these Indians in simple cotton tunics, and they got a campfire over here that they're melting, metals in. So it's a strange mixture of a primitive people and a primitive technology with what is like a super technology. And it doesn't make sense. I mean, whoever's building this, and they have to have power tools, among other things. What's also here at Lake Titicaca and Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, if you look to the west, you will see this pyramid. And there's a village over here too. I took a long telephoto shot of this. And one time when I was here at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, and I was with my guide from Bolivia, and he pointed to this thing, he said, "Oh yeah, and there's a giant pyramid over here." And in fact, it hasn't been officially made an archaeological site by the Bolivian government. I mean, no one has said this is a pyramid, but that's what it is. It's a giant pyramid, and the people in the village are looting it. They're excavating it themselves. And I told the guide, we were in a little minibus, I said, well, let's go to that pyramid. Let's go to this town. And he was like, well, okay, we can go a little bit of the way. So we drove part of the way there on a dirt road. But then before we got to the town, he stopped. He said, we can't go into this town. The villagers won't let us come there. They don't want anyone coming and visiting this place. So, and in other countries, Bolivia is kind of different. Bolivia doesn't have a real strong central government, so people are able to do stuff like this, do excavations on this pyramid. Now, one of the things that came out of that pyramid or nearby it and that village is this. This is called the Fuente Magna bowl, and it was found in 1960 just near that pyramid by a guy's house. And a Catholic priest was visiting him, and what he saw was this man using this, it's a ceramic bowl, using this ceramic bowl to feed his pigs. And the priest thought, this is interesting bowl. This is an ancient bowl. And the man said, yeah, I dug it up. When I was digging a well or something, I dug this up near my house. And so I'm feeding my pigs with it. And the priest said, we need to get this to La Paz and to the archaeologists. So what they did was they traded him a house. They traded him a house for this bowl, a small house. And now, even though it was found in 1960, it wasn't put on display in the museum in La Paz, and that's where it is. It's in the Gold Museum in La Paz today, which is a national museum. And this is the big deal with this bowl, the Fuente Magna bowl. It has two types of Sumerian writing on it. It has Sumerian hieroglyphs on the right side, and then it has Sumerian cuneiform on the left side. So this bowl, it's in the National Museum in Bolivia, but this bowl can't be there. This mainstream archaeology cannot ever recognize this bowl as being authentic, because it would mean that Sumerians had been coming from Sumeria to South America and to Lake Titicaca and to Tiwanaku, and that they were doing some of the mining, and that they were building some of this. And this is an archaeological time bomb in South America, in a national museum. All that mainstream archaeologists can do with this is ignore it. They'll just pretend it's not there. They just won't talk about it. You won't see it. Even though it's in a national museum in Bolivia, they're not going to talk about this because this one object singularly destroys all of the history that they're claiming about South America, North America, Sumerians, people traveling across the Pacific, across the Atlantic, people traveling around the world in ancient times. I mean, this bowl is probably from at least 2000 BC, more like 3000, 4000 BC. A lot of the dating is kind of strange. That's my friend Christopher Dunn, who's from Manchester, standing there in the background. When you're in the museum, they tell you, don't take photos of this bowl. Well, you know, yeah, give me a break, you know. First thing I did as soon as the guard walked away was start taking photos, you know. But that's not all. Well, here's the H blocks too. Wait, did I miss? Yeah, I missed something. Here we go. Yeah, I went to, yeah. Okay, there's another one. There are two artifacts. Also found in that pyramid that I was showing you is the Pokatia statue. It too has Sumerian writing on it, which is here. The writing is on his thigh. This is a red granite statue. It's about 4 feet high. It's been broken in two. It's also in that museum, but it's not on display. I've seen it because when Ancient Aliens went there to do one of the episodes, they brought it out. And I took all these pictures, but it turned out my camera had already run out of, you know, I'd already filled up my camera, so. But so you won't be able to see this. If you do go to La Paz, you'll be able to see the Fuente Magna. So here, once again, we have Sumerian writing on an object that's found near Tiwanaku. All right, so the famous H blocks, they are cut in such a way and articulated in a very fancy way. I mean, the way they are cut, very precise cuts and articulation, even fancy decorations like you can see on the inside. Extremely well made. They're made out of granite. This is what they would kind of look like if they were being fitted together. And here, we'll have a look at how these walls might have been constructed with the H blocks. So we have an animation here. We can get that going. Should start up in a second. Okay, I'm not seeing it up here. Well, perhaps we don't have this animation, but it's, it shows all these blocks coming together. I thought we had this figured out, but I guess not. We could try it again. Shall I go back? All right. Yeah, it's not projecting, I guess. Okay, well, it's okay. Let's keep moving. Oh, here it goes. So yeah, just watch this for a minute. So these blocks are kind of like prefabricated Lego blocks or something like that, and they're made to fit together. Yeah, so here they come down, and they would make this really like a giant wall. Okay, so that was that. So you can see that this H blocks and what's there, it's tremendously sophisticated. And so this goes back to where we saw the Indians in their simple cotton tunics with a campfire, you know, making all this stuff. That's just clearly not the case. And this is such a problem with mainstream archaeology, is that, when engineers look at this stuff, they can see that this is a tremendously advanced technology and building. This is not done by simple people. So here's Christopher Dunn again, my friend from Manchester. He lives in Illinois now, and he's a great engineer. He wrote the Giza power plant book, which I totally endorse. And we've traveled a number of times to Peru and to Egypt. This is the Serapeum in Saqqara, just west of the Giza pyramids in Egypt. And to go into the Serapeum, which was closed for many years in Egypt, you had to, for about 15 years, you could not visit this. I had been there in the kind of mid-'80s or so, and then they closed it, but then they did reopen it again just a few years ago. But when you go there, it's just flat desert, it's what you're looking at, but then you start walking down these stairs, and you enter into these catacombs. And what's in there are these gigantic basalt boxes, which are made out of basalt. They weigh about 80 tons. They have a giant lid on them. They're huge boxes, and archaeologists don't know what they were for. They assume that they were coffins, giant basalt coffins for mummified bulls, which they call the Apis bulls. But they only found one of these bulls in one of these boxes. And one of the big mystery of the Serapeum is not just how they made these things out of basalt and whatnot. I mean, they're perfectly made. Some of them do have hieroglyphs, but they're in these little closets. So you're underground in these tunnels, and there'll just be a little notch off to the side. But how could they move these 80-ton basalt boxes through these tunnels? What mainstream archaeologists are saying, well, you just get so many hundred people pulling on a rope, and you're wearing harnesses and stuff like that. And you're pulling and you're hauling this just with your brute strength, these giant blocks of basalt into these tunnels, but there's no place for these people to stand. And you would have to push these things into these little closets and cubbyholes. So exactly how they would even move these things, again, without having some kind of levitation or anti-gravity, you can't imagine it. And the Egyptians today can't move these boxes at all. One of them is it's actually blocking the main tunnel, but the Egyptians can't move it, so you have to walk around it. And when you're down there, you're just like, what? You can't figure out what's going on or how they would move all these things. Whoops, here we go. Yeah, that's me and looking at one of the blocks. This is an illustration of how you might make these blocks. I mean, they don't know how they would even make them. You would actually have to use a drill and just drill out the box, the inner container of these basalt boxes. I mean, it's incredible. You're just there, and particularly when you're an engineer or somebody who does this stuff, you're amazed. You're like, wow, who is doing this stuff? There are some hieroglyphs that have been etched into it. Most of them are plain, but there are a few hieroglyphs. But even making these hieroglyphs on these basalt boxes would be difficult. I mean, how would they do that? You would need diamond-tipped drills, like a dentist drill or something, to etch and cut these hieroglyphs into these basalt. Basalt is so extremely hard. It's probably the most difficult stone to be working. Here's Christopher Dunn inside one of the boxes, and he was able to, he's using precision machining tools to look at the precision of it. And this one thing I learned from him was that when you're using computer-aided, CAD designed tools, and again, you have diamond tools, diamond cutters, and you need electricity and stuff to power these things. But with that kind of technology, everything's going to be perfect. And a computer-aided power tool can do no less than perfectly straight cut and the angles. Inside angles of these things are the most difficult things to do. Mainstream archaeologists are saying, oh, they're just pounding these things out with rock hammers in their hands. They also say that incredibly, mainstream archaeologists are saying the Egyptians did not have iron tools, and all they had were copper chisels. You can't do this with a copper chisel. And in fact, get this. Egyptologists are saying today that, I mean, forget working on basalt like this. I mean, they wouldn't even discuss this one. But just to be cutting the granite blocks and statues and whatnot that are in Egypt, if they're using a copper chisel, you can only use it once. You would take literally one blow of that chisel, and it's useless. And so this is what they say. You have an entire line of 500 guys, each with a chisel. And after you take one blow, they hand you another chisel. Take another blow. That's how they built these things. You're just thinking like, wow, this doesn't make any sense. So here we go. More of what's it like inside. You can see the narrow little passageways that these move through. I mean, to me, about the closest thing I can think of to moving these things is that great scene in The Empire Strikes Back when Han Solo's frozen in carbonite and the bounty hunter Boba Fett is and it's levitating, right? It's this black carbonite block, and he's just it's levitating. He's just sort of pushing it up this ramp into his spaceship, and it's like floating, and it's just floating itself. He just gives a little push, and it goes. And that must be really about how they moved things at the Serapeum. Okay, everyone likes me to talk about stone balls. So, we'll talk about stone balls now. The main place where we see stone balls and where they're the most famous is Costa Rica. Costa Rica is just north of Panama, south of Nicaragua. And this is in the capital, Costa Rica, called San Jose, which is towards the Pacific side. Most of these balls are found along the Pacific side of Costa Rica. They're various sizes. They're of granite. Archaeologists totally admit and know that these are man-made or alien-made. They're not natural. These are absolutely artificial. Some of them are almost the size of a Volkswagen Bug or something. Larger than this stone in the middle. And you find them around. They're in bank lots. There's a museum there where they've moved some of them. They're actually found out in the jungle. And the archaeologists have no explanation for these balls, what they were for, how they were made. I'm told that making a perfectly round granite ball is one of the most difficult things to do. And once again, you probably need a CAD, computer-aided design program, and power tools to create perfect granite balls. And again, this is a very hard stone. The mainstream archaeological explanation, essentially, of these stone balls in Costa Rica, anyway, is that they were a sign of nobility and chief. When you had a stone ball, you were the chief. And I mean, that's their explanation. And in fact, there we go. This is what they must have been used for, I think. The plugging up the entrances to secret temples, maybe. But yeah, they're saying in Costa Rica that, and the chiefs, he would be buried with a stone ball. And at the museum, they show you a little burial, they mock a burial, and they put a small stone ball there. Like, this is the chief stone ball, So they don't have an explanation for it. And to be honest, I don't have a good explanation for stone balls, too. So here we are. This is it, the tomb. He's got a stone ball. He's the main man, gets a stone ball in his tomb. But that's something later. I mean, the Costa Ricans themselves didn't know what these stone balls were for. They don't know. And a lot of them were just in the jungle. It's like they were washed up in a big tidal wave up into these mountain jungle hills. And then and in modern times, they've brought them to the Capitol and put them in the museum and stuff. Well, let's now have a look at the trolley, the Los Angeles trolley. Now, this was a booklet that was sent to me by somebody, and around 1910, in Los Angeles, they wanted to build an electric trolley going through from the coast through Santa Monica, going inland. And this was the souvenir booklet for the trolley. And so an electric trolley with the grade, it can't really go up a steep hill, and there's a bunch of hills in Los Angeles. So they brought out some steam shovels to take out these hills in Los Angeles so that the tracks for the trolley could be pretty much level. And what happened when they started digging into this hill? A bunch of stone balls. So they find, so they go into this hill, and it's got like 30 stone balls in it. At the time, they said, oh, they're dinosaur eggs. Today, we don't know what happened to these stone balls. They ended up in people's gardens and stuff in Los Angeles. They've all kind of disappeared. We don't know where these things are now. But, I mean, this is just bizarre, you know. So these stone balls were somehow washed up in Los Angeles, covered with dirt, some cataclysm or something, and then, in 1910, they uncovered this, dug into this hill, and they found them. All right, let's go to Franz Josef Land in the Russian Arctic. This is up near Spitsbergen, but it's to the east. It's actually part of Russia. So you go up there. Very few people ever get up to Franz Josef Land. Cruise ships cruise up here now and then. And so some tourists get up there. Well, what do you see up there? Bunch of stone balls of granite, like this one on the right. It's cracked, but it's like a perfect stone ball. That's a granite stone ball. What's it? In fact, this is one of the things that the tourists go and take photos of when they go to Franz Josef Land. Is, let's go see the stone balls. And exactly what they're doing. Now, archaeologists and geologists are saying, these are not, artificial. They're somehow natural. And to be natural like this, their explanation there is that, some volcano that doesn't exist anymore, spewed out some hot lava, and as it flying through the air, it got spinning, and then it became a ball, and then it cooled, and it landed. I mean, that's kind of their explanation, actually. Or that somehow glaciers, made this thing. I mean, they don't have a good explanation for it. And they look a lot like the stone balls in Costa Rica. So here's some more. All right. Yep, another one of the stone balls in Franz Josef Land. And they're granite. We don't know what they're doing up there. And they probably are artificial, but how they would got there. These are some stone balls in Bosnia. And there's this kind of creek, ravine, and it's got a bunch of stone balls in it that you can see. There's maybe like 8 or 9 or something like that. So here's more of the Bosnian stone balls here. All right, and now these ones are in Mexico, Piedras Bolas. They're saying they are natural too, somehow, and that, there are these volcanic bombs, that's what they're saying, that are thrown out. These ones are in Siberia, in Nazarovo, Siberia. This is just a couple of years ago. This was on the internet, and I was like, wow. So they were building this new city up in Siberia or something, and they found these stone balls. And I don't think there's any volcano or anything around this. So again, we don't know what these stone balls are doing here. Here you go. The Moriaki boulders in New Zealand, they're on the South Island on the west side. And they're quite, any of you who've been to New Zealand or are from New Zealand, you would know about these probably. So there are a bunch of stone balls too. They're said to be some kind of natural formation. Again, they can't really explain it very well. There's about 30 of them or something, and they're all together. And they're kind of just in the ocean, really. So we've got other stone balls in San Augusta, Italy. Pretty big. I mean, this is not for a catapult or something. Here we go. More stone balls in Italy. These are more of the stone balls in Italy. They got worn. Here's some more. They get piled up. This is in Dubrovnik in Croatia. And I thought this was interesting. I was just walking around Dubrovnik, and there were all these stone balls that were there. These are relatively small in a sense, so perhaps they were for catapults or something like that. We don't know. So here we go. Okay, Gongxi in Hunan, China. This is southern China, kind of near Hong Kong. And yeah, it's this town, and it's famous for its stone balls. And tourists go there, take their pictures. It's one of the stone balls in Gongxi. Now, this doesn't look like granite. This could be a concretion that's a conglomerate. These are stone balls at Malta. So until Göbekli Tepe was discovered, archaeologists were saying that the ruins on Malta were the oldest in the world. Now they say that Göbekli Tepe is older, but the stone balls there too. One of the ideas is that they use these smaller stone balls for moving megaliths, like sort of marbles or ball bearings underneath some giant slab of rock. I mean, that's not a bad idea. More of the stone blocks and stuff in Malta. Malta also has an obelisk. Okay, now let's go to Easter Island. And what do we find there? A stone ball. And in fact, this is a small one. It's in the museum. It's about the size of a volleyball or maybe a soccer ball, a little bit smaller. It's in the museum. But in fact, on the north side of Easter Island is a small pen, and it has a stone ball too, with a couple of other small stone balls on it. And Easter Islanders say that on the entire island, this is the most important thing. More important than all the statues on Easter Island or anything. It's this one stone ball. And archaeologists asked them, well, why is this stone ball so important? No one can say. And the islanders have no explanation either. They just say, oh, this is the most important thing. This is the most sacred thing on the whole island. And it's not natural either. So, I mean, you just got all this mystery. That stone ball is over sort of to the right of this. This is the quarry on Easter Island. It's called Anunnaki. This is where the giant statues are quarried. This is where they're sitting up to their chests in just dirt and debris along the slopes. Some of them are fallen, some of them are leaning over. But yeah, what you're seeing here with a lot of these statues is that their bodies are deep inside the soil. And in fact, according to the Easter Islanders, what the statues were meant to do was that after they were quarried in sort of this area right over here called Volcano Ranaraku, the statues then were brought out to the edge of the island, and according to the Easter Islanders, inlaid eyes were put in the statue, and the statues all faced inland, and a power came out of the eyes that they called mana, which is a Sanskrit word, has the same meaning really of an occult power, mana, almost like a vril power or orgone, some kind of basic energy. And this power came out of the eyes, and it protected the island and kept it from sinking. Because the Easter Islanders say that they were from another continent that they called Hiva. But Hiva is now under the water in the Pacific, and they're saying that Easter Island is the last bit of it. So the Easter Island these statues are keeping the island from sinking. That's what the islanders believed. And in fact, they could only walk in a clockwise pattern. They walked. That's what the Easter Islanders said. Or they walked or were like levitated or something. But they had to walk in a clockwise pattern around the island. And in fact, on this northern, well, it would be western area up here at the top, there's a magnetic anomaly. And it's on the maps. They tell you your compass will not work right there. Your compass goes crazy. And back in the early 80s, Jacques Cousteau was there with his famous ship, the Calypso. And his son, Philippe Cousteau, had an ultralight aircraft on the boat. And he wanted to fly it around Easter Island, do an aerial survey. And they told him, they said, well, don't fly near this volcano up over here, because all your instruments will go crazy, like the Bermuda Triangle or something, and it'll be dangerous for you. Well, he ignored that. He flew around there. The instruments on his ultralight did go crazy, and he crashed. And he was almost killed. And he was medevaced back to Santiago, Chile, where they saved his life. So the whole thing is very strange on Easter Island, the giant statues. In my book on the Cam, I explain these statues. They're actually, I believe, statues of Shiva, the Hindu god Shiva. I explain that in my book on the Cam. But here's what's interesting about these statues, and there's a whole bunch of them. Many of them never left the quarry. They were never put around the island. You can see here how some of the statues, how big these statues are, and they had these top knots on their head, which was like a hat. Some of them are kind of different. Like this one guy is kneeling up here, the second one from the top. So he's an unusual statue. The famous Norwegian archaeologist Thor Heyerdahl is the one who uncovered that one. But here we see, this is also from Thor Heyerdahl's expedition, where you can see how there's 40 feet of this statue underground. So it's like it's been there for a couple of thousand years, and that much soil has built up around the statue. I mean, they can't explain this, really. Mainstream archaeologists are saying these statues aren't that old either. They're saying they're from about 1200 AD. That's their explanation. But here you can see how deeply buried under the soil many of these statues are, and you see the big lichen patches and stuff like that. I mean, the whole Easter Island is amazing. Here's what those inlaid eyes look like. This is in the museum. There was an inlaid ivory and obsidian to these things. What Easter Islanders, they believe the statues were alive. And later, during a war, which they called the war between the long ears and the short ears, they wanted to destroy the statues and kill them by tipping them over and breaking their necks, and that would kill the statue. This is a very unusual statue on Easter Island, which has only recently been on display. And it's of a woman, but very strange, with the long head and everything. There are two breasts here. This is a unique and totally weird statue. Looks like some almost extraterrestrial or something. And this is another strange statue found on Easter Island in 1960, but it wasn't put into the museum until about 15 years ago. I mean, they kept this off display for some reason. And he looks also a little bit like an alien or something. Here's that statue now in the museum. And near the big airport on Easter Island is this site called Vinapu, which sounds a lot like Vimana. And it's just like walls in Peru, perfectly fitted. I mean, it's been cut by power tools. This is granite. You have the big lichen patches. It's a platform. So this one is rather unique just because it's so perfectly made. You can see it again from the corner. So this is just so much like what you see in Peru and Bolivia, stuff like that. Even down to these little notchings and putting a small little block in with these larger blocks. And this is the statue that was uncovered by Thor Heyerdahl that's in the Quizuo position, this kneeling position with your hands on your knees is your Quizuo. You're kneeling, you put your hands on your knees. Here he is. Now the Quizuo position is something also that's found all over the world. This one is in China. So he's also got his hands on his knees, and oftentimes your head is forward. Here's an Egyptian statue in what's called the Kuzuo position. Here's another Shang Chinese dynasty Kuzuo position. He's got one of the Mohawk haircuts on his head. This is at Tiwanaku. They're wearing the turbans and stuff. They're in the Kuzuo position too. They're on their knees with their hands on their knees. This is an Olmec statue that's in Mexico. He's in the Kuzuo position. This is also made out of granite. He has the same top knot head that you see on Easter Island. This one is at Mohenjo-Daro, which today is in Pakistan. He's in the Kuzuo position too. And now back to Easter Island. They have their own language and written language on Easter Island called Rongo Rongo, which no one can read today. But it apparently is the same characters and whatnot from the Indus Valley. And what the characters are it's the way you hold your hands and your arms. Every position is different. In India, that's called what they call mudras. And even the way you hold your hands and your fingers and everything, it all has a special meaning. This is the Rongo Rongo writing, which is written on these tablets. It's written in what they call the Bostafidan pattern, where one line is written to the right, then the next line to the left, right? They say as the ox plows. That's an unusual way of writing. We can't read, no one has been able to translate this, or the Indus Valley writing. And in fact, Doric Greek was written like that. The Hittite inscriptions in Turkey, they're also written in that same manner. All right, let's go to the amazing city of Nan Madol. It's on a Micronesian island called Ponape. It is built out of basalt. Archaeologists believe that 250 million tons of basalt was used to build the walls here in Nan Madol. This is an island that's kind of between Guam and New Guinea. Today it's the capital of the Federated States of Micronesia. So 250 million tons of basalt stacked up in these walls, 100 artificial islands. They're actually in the ocean. A lot of it's underwater. The largest stones are about 80 tons. And according to the islanders there, they say all of these basalt logs were flown through the air, levitated through the air from the other side of the island, and then stacked up into these walls. Some of it's underwater today, and 100 artificial islands, 250 million tons of basalt. And in fact, they don't know even where all this basalt came from. Entire mountains, much of it's underwater, entire mountains would have been dismantled for all this basalt. And in fact, there is one mountain on the other side of the island, and this part of it's a basalt plug. They call this Chicken Shit Mountain. And I mean, there are places on the island where you could get basalt for sure. I mean, it's a volcanic island. But so much material is in this city that entire mountains would be dismantled. I mean, it's the eighth wonder of the world. Giorgio and I are headed there just next month for an Ancient Aliens episode. All right, let's talk about cone heads real briefly and keep moving here. So, cone heads. We've got cone heads are all over the world. They're in Malta, they're in Hungary, they're in Iraq, they're in Korea and China, they're in South America. So you have these guys, I mean, they're along the coast of South America, it's so dry. These ones are actually also in Paracas and Ica. So you have these elongated skulls. There are ways to manipulate a child's skull to do this. There's one from Chongos. This is near Paracas. This is an area south of Lima, on the way to Nazca, actually. And so here we have these guys with these heads, and I mean, their craniums are like twice the size of our own. And we don't know why people did this, and the big question, of course, is whether some people, rather than being manipulated into this, that they naturally have these elongated heads. So here we go. There's an X-ray of these guys. I mean, they are pretty much like normal humans, but they have these strange elongated heads. Now, this is a particularly unusual one of these skulls from Peru, because the idea is when you're a very small child, the plates in your head have not fused yet, so you can actually bind the head and then crush it, and you can force deformation of the skull. We know that can be done, and in fact, it was being done in Vanuatu and in Kurdistan and in Africa until fairly recently. But the idea is that these sutures and the plates in your head would fuse, but this guy doesn't have that. He doesn't have this normal fusion of the head, of the plates coming together. And so this is very anomalistic in the sense that it would appear that this whoever's skull this was, that they're not a normal human being, apparently. I mean, we just don't know, really. They're trying to do DNA tests on them. We have these things. But this is not just in South America, as I was saying. This is something going on all over the world. And in fact, this is the daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Her name is Meritaten. And yeah, she's got an elongated head too. And in fact, Tutankhamun, King Tut, he also has an elongated head. They never really talk about that. And when you see stuff about King Tut on TV, but he also has an elongated head like this too. Now the Anunnaki, they also had in northern Sumeria, they also had these elongated heads, and they have what archaeologists call coffee bean eyes. That's what they call the eyes, which are very strange. These are called Ubaid figures. They were found in northern Iraq. They're clay figures, and supposedly they're of the gods, the Anunnaki gods and stuff. So here's other figures of the Ubaid figures. So they look quite strange, and you could certainly easily believe that, yeah, these are some kind of extraterrestrials. They're not normal humans. Perhaps these are what we call the Anunnaki, just the strange eyes, the elongated heads. So with the Sumerians and the Assyrians, we have this whole thing of they're flying in a flying disc. You see men up here. So you have they're talking about flight, vimanas, flying. These guys are also Anunnaki, those strange hats that they're wearing. That's signifying the Anunnaki. They have beards and mustaches and stuff. Here's one of the Anunnaki now with the wings, like the birdmen and stuff that we were looking at before in Peru. And since we're talking about flying saucers, let's have a look at some UFO photos. This is supposedly one of the oldest UFO photos around. There are a few older, 1929, taken in Ward, Colorado, April 1929. So it appears to be a UFO. This one was a giant cylindrical UFO over New York City in 1950, taken there, just huge, just cigar-shaped craft just hovering over the city. Here's a close-up of it. This is taken Utah, June 10th, 1960. Nice color photo. That craft, and it looks a lot like the Adamski craft that many of you might be familiar with, and also similar to what they called the Honeyboo saucer that allegedly was developed in Germany during World War II. Now these are really some cool photos you're about to see here. These were taken by an American submarine called the USS Trepang in March 1971, and this allegedly took place in the North Atlantic, somewhere near Iceland. These photos were taken in 1971, but they were somehow leaked by someone in the American military, in the US Navy, I guess, to a magazine in Paris in just about 5 years ago. And so this magazine in Paris published these photos, and they're pretty astonishing. So the photos are being taken by a submarine, I guess through the periscope of the submarine, and they're watching this. And what happens is this huge craft begins coming out of the water, nose first. It comes out of the water. It's now coming out of the water. It's got water and steam is coming off it. Perhaps it has some strong electromagnetic field around it that's heating the water and turning it to steam. The craft is now leveling out over the ocean. You can still see water and steam is coming off of it. And then finally, as the craft it's leveled out, this is because it was photos from a magazine that was like the thing. You can see some lights or something along the edge of the craft. And then finally, the craft is leveling out over the water. It's like a huge cigar-shaped craft. And then here, finally, this big picture of what it looked like there of the water. And then, after this giant UFO came out of the water, another UFO came out afterwards that was a small, kind of triangular or disc-shaped craft, we're not really sure. It came out of the water afterwards, and then it flew off as well. So pretty astonishing photos, allegedly, coming from the U.S. Navy, but they were leaked. I mean, the U.S. Navy, someone who was on that craft, who had access to these photos, they then leaked it to this Paris magazine. Another interesting UFO event happened in New Zealand in December of 1978. It's called the Kaikoura UFO. And what was happening at that time was that a cargo ship airplane was flying back and forth between the North and South Island of New Zealand every night. It was a nightly cargo flight. And what was happening was, in December, they were being followed by a UFO almost every night. So they then put a camera crew onto the cargo airplane they wanted to film the UFO. And that cargo plane, when the UFO showed up again, and they're taking like 16 millimeter film of the UFO. And the UFO is flying along, and it's paralleling them as they're flying north from the South Island back to the North Island, and it's flying along. It's a kind of a round-shaped UFO. They see it, and then in this frame over here, it does this. And then after that, it disappeared. This is what it did. The frame of the film is 1/30th of a second. And this UFO was doing this. It was showing off it like knew it was being filmed even. And in 1/30th of a second, the UFO suddenly made this figure 8 move to be captured on the camera. And then it went. So in 1/30th of a second, the UFO did that. And it was basically showing off. It was saying, hey, film me, I'm here. Take a picture. Okay, just a couple of years ago, in May 2016, over Dayton, Ohio, which is where Wright-Patterson Airfield is. This is allegedly where Hangar 18 is, and alien bodies are, and all that stuff. This is in Ohio, central Ohio. And so Wright-Patterson is right near Dayton. Dayton's a major city, but you've got this major Air Force base right nearby. And here's this thing, was just hovering in the sky, kind of like an arrowhead. It was just hovering in the sky on broad daylight over the city. And I took these pictures of it, and then it vanished into a cloud. But it just hovered there over the city for like 20 minutes or something like that. So here we go. I mean, it's all kind of strange. You have to wonder, I mean, since Wright-Patterson Airfield is right nearby, you'd almost think this is perhaps coming from the U.S. military, in fact. All right, let's get into Nikola Tesla. I got my Nikola Tesla t-shirt on. Probably the greatest inventor who ever lived. Tesla was born in Croatia. He was a Serbo-Croatian. He then came to London and eventually to New York. He worked for Edison, He's the inventor of alternating current, three-phase motors. What creates alternating AC power is rotating magnetic fields. That's what creates electricity. So Tesla's the inventor of that. Before that, we had direct current power, but we didn't have AC. So Tesla's the inventor of that. Here's Mark Twain in Tesla's laboratory. Here's Tesla again with his wireless demo. Tesla was really, he's such an amazing guy. He's a suppressed person. He's probably the most greatest scientist who ever lived in many ways, but most people don't know who he is. Certain powers have kept him from just being acknowledged in a sense, particularly since after World War II. His student was Guglielmo Marconi. Marconi, unlike Tesla, Tesla was a kind of a man out of time. He was a social misfit. He was a terrible businessman. He had no idea how to run a company or manage money. He never got married. He had all kinds of phobias. He was really a kind of strange guy. Marconi was quite different. Marconi was a genius, just like Tesla. And Marconi, though, was a great businessman. He knew how to deal with money. He became multimillionaire, lived on a yacht. Marconi supposedly died in 1937, although there are stories that Marconi and a bunch of scientists didn't die, and that right before World War II, they moved to South America. And in fact, the James Bond movie Moonraker is essentially kind of mimicking the story of Marconi's secret city in South America. Albert Einstein. So with Einstein, one of the things Einstein said was he said that gravity and magnetism and electricity all manifest from the unified field. So the unified field is an energy field that contains gravity and magnetism and electricity. And so just like there would be an equation for electromagnetism, you would have, in the unified field, you'd have an equation for electrogravity and for magnetogravity. So you would have, with the unified field, you'd have mathematical equations for these things. And that's what Einstein said, but he never published any documents about the unified field. The whole idea of having plasmas, gyros spinning, you have toroid fluids, you've got a plasma is an electrified gas, all these kind of things. This is actually by a British author named Paul Potter. But yeah, you're creating artificial gravity. You have your own gravitational field. That's why these craft can move on a dime. They can suddenly turn any direction because you're within your own gravity field, and the Earth's gravity field isn't really affecting you. So Tesla had a death ray. His death ray, some people think his death ray was a scalar weapon where energy comes in and it's a scalar bottle where the energy waves all come together and then things are destroyed. But only just recently, Princeton University came out with a book on Tesla, and they were the first ones to put in these drawings by Tesla, which were never patented, and that's why people didn't know about this. But his thing was that, his death ray was a mercury plasma jet, which in a sense that pellets of superheated mercury are shot out of a gun or something like that. And this would actually be like the Star Wars pistols and stuff like that. They're shooting little heated, electrified mercury blasts. Tesla was going to put up these towers. The FBI tore them down. He was going to broadcast electricity from these towers. Airships would just pick up the power. These anti-gravity ships, you can see them there. They would have powerful searchlights. Some of them didn't have wings. They were anti-gravity. These towers were just putting out power into the atmosphere, like a TV station or a radio station. So these were drawings from the 1920s of concepts of Tesla's whole idea of these towers. Now, there was a group that was out of Illinois and California called the Lemurian Fellowship, and they maintained that in Atlantis, there was a tower called the Max Tower, which was a giant crystal tower that broadcast power into the atmosphere, just like Tesla's ideas and stuff like that. And it was a giant crystal tower. Well, and in fact, crystal towers like that exist. They're called obelisks. So here's an obelisk at Karnak Temple in Luxor, Egypt, southern Egypt. So yeah, an obelisk is a monolith. It's granite. It has crystals. Quartz crystals are infused into it. Here's the unfinished obelisk, an old photo of it, how gigantically huge they are. Here's the unfinished obelisk again. The unfinished obelisk weighs about 1,000 tons. Most obelisks only weigh about 500 tons. Egyptologists don't have an explanation for obelisks. They say that they were just meant to be a ray of the sun, to symbolize a ray of the sun. Here's Christopher Dunn. He's inside the trenches of quarrying an obelisk. I mean, it's a massive undertaking to create an obelisk, to lift it up out of its quarry, to move it somewhere, and just to stand it up. Modern Egyptians can't do it today. Here's the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. being hit by lightning, just as an example. So, yeah, in the United States, for the power of Washington, D.C., we've got a giant obelisk. The largest obelisk ever erected was in Ethiopia. And it's not this one stood up. It's this obelisk here. It was standing, and this obelisk was bigger than any obelisk ever erected in Egypt, but it came crashing down onto this other building over here, broke into just pieces. And in fact, just pieces of this obelisk are huge, megaliths weighing hundreds of tons. I mean, it's quite amazing. And it came down onto this building, which Ethiopians believe had an anti-gravity machine inside of it. They think the Ark of the Covenant is there too. We also have the keystone cuts here. This is all in Aksum. So we're seeing the same keystone cuts. And here's the clamps that we saw in Peru, that we see in Egypt, in Angkor Wat, in Vietnam. We have the monolithic doors, like we saw at Tiwanaku. This church right here, Ethiopians believe that the Ark of the Covenant is inside that church. And there's a priest there who is guarding it. Now, there are obelisks here in England, and they're in Yorkshire. They're called the Devil's Arrows. And this is the Rudston monolith, which is also in Yorkshire near Scarborough. And it's an obelisk too. This was a strange story from a Canadian named Hugh Cochrane about the Great Lakes. And in it, he tells a story of the Presqu'île National Park. And in the early 1800s, there was an obelisk, he says, that was in the lake, and the tip just came out of the lake. And people would row out to it on a Sunday afternoon and anchor their rowboats to it and have a picnic. And they could see the obelisk going down into the water. This is what they said. But then there was a big storm, about 1805, and a ship hit the obelisk and crashed it, and that ship sunk too. So that obelisk isn't there anymore. Let's go briefly to the moon. We've got all these things. There are obelisks on the moon. They're called the Blair Cuspids. And here we go. They're photos. You see the shadows and stuff. Here we go. This is what it looks like. This is what the Blair Cuspids on the moon look like. So incredibly, apparently there are obelisks on the moon. And in fact, the moon itself is thought to be hollow by some people. We can talk about that later. There are craters on the moon that are thought to be bottomless, that perhaps go inside the moon. The moon is possibly hollow. And get this is also a leaked photo from the Russian Zond 3. This was one of the early Russian probes to the moon. And look on the right side. There's this huge tower over there on the right side of the moon. This thing it's 20 miles high. Here it is. So how about that? Apparently there are giant towers on the moon. Another Zond 3 photo of a lunar dome. The Russians were always very much open to extraterrestrials. They were, the communists wanted to disprove religion and whatnot. So the Russians always saw themselves as very scientific, that there would be structures on the moon. They had no problem with that. While NASA itself has essentially tried to cover up what's on the moon. And these are other things. Let's go quickly to Mars. I'm running out of time. This is the Phobos. There's a monolith on Phobos. It's called the Phobos monolith. It's also some giant tower that's on the moon of Phobos on Mars. Here's some of the structures of it. Mars has another moon called Deimos. This is another Russian photo of this craft moving into the Phobos, a huge cigar-shaped craft. It was then shot out of orbit, the Russian spacecraft, quickly to Mars, pyramids on Mars, other structures on Mars, and this is called the Mars monolith. So it too is like an obelisk or something, also on Mars. And I know that I've run out of time already. I'm going to end my presentation right there. Thank you, everyone.